This is an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Scott Overton is the author of the science fiction novel Indigent Earth, a story where the 1%ers have left the planet, leaving the rest of us on this ravaged third rock from the sun. Scott joins us via Zoom from Sudbury, Ontario. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation. It's great to be here.
Thanks for being on the program with us. Now, I understand we chatted a little bit before we got to air here. We have a shared existence. You spent a long time in radio, and also your first book dealt with radio. So before we get to your newest one, tell us about writing that first book.
Well, I thought there weren't all that many books about the radio industry. There are a few, and a few movies. But I thought, people would be interested in that. And there's the old adage, write what you know. So I wrote a story about a morning radio man, which I was, and he finds a death threat when he comes into work one morning on the first page of the book. And it's not a joke. He figures somebody's playing a sick joke on him. It's not. So it's about the vulnerability of media people. You know, and I know, Peter, that people are great. Most listeners are great. But does it matter that could be one person that's got a grudge against you, or you say something wrong that you didn't mean to offend anyone, and suddenly they've got a real hate on for you? It can happen very easily. So that's what the story does. It's an ordinary guy faced with this unthinkable situation. Somebody's actually trying to kill him. And eventually he has to try to figure out who, why, because the police don't have enough to go on.
An angry listener who gets a little too angry, I think we've all been there.
They can get very angry, and as I say, it's so easy to offend someone unintentionally. Some radio people intentionally offend people. I never did. And it didn't happen to me, but I've seen some similar things.
Now, the name of that book was, by the way?
Dead Air. I think it's required that you have to have a book called Dead Air if it involves murder or anything close to it, and it's radio. It's that radio term. It's just there.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that there are a lot of movies, television shows that depict radio hosts and radio jobs. And I always tell people, and maybe you'll agree, I don't know, I find that I've never found a television show or movie that accurately depicted the job that we used to do. However, WKRP is not a comedy, it's a documentary.
Yeah, I love that show. It had some ridiculous parts of it, but they were purely technical things nobody'd care about. The essence of the show was absolutely bang on.
Absolutely. Well, anyway, let's get to your new book. Your new book is called Indigent Earth, and tell us what it's about. I gave a brief description in the introduction, but tell us what it's about.
It was a good description, Peter. I mean, the premise is that the rich and famous, rich and powerful leave the Earth. They abandon the damaged Earth to go live in space colonies out about the distance of the moon, and they have promised that they will return in 500 years when the planet's had a chance to heal. So the story begins at the time they decide to come back. But the story centers on an Earthman and a colonial woman who are absolutely incredible opposites, and they are forced to work together to uncover some dark secrets. And so I tell the story of the two cultures and the clash of cultures via these two people, these two characters.
And what was the impetus? What led you to writing this particular story in the first place? Was it because of the situation with global warming and the news that we hear all the time, or was there something else specific to the genesis for this story?
Well, I think the premise is pretty plausible. I mean, the Earth is becoming damaged. Climate change could go beyond our ability to change it, and it could be very, very bad. And the rich and powerful own the space industries nowadays. It's quite plausible they could go and do that kind of thing and live out in space colonies. But the impetus was more along the lines of colonialism. You and I know, Peter, that the treatment of Aboriginal and Indigenous peoples in Canada is a pretty shameful episode, and it's now in the national consciousness. It's gotten a lot of attention, finally, in the past decade or two, and so that was really what it is. I think colonialism is not going away. It's just going to change that economic inequality between the rich and the poor, the privileged and the not privileged. we could end up on the wrong side of it, and all the wealthy are on the other side, and something will need to be done about it.
It's often said that science fiction is just a masking of what is going on in our general society, and I think you just described it. So would you say that's an accurate assessment of science fiction and how and why you wrote this particular book?
I think so, yes. I think that science fiction, at its best as a literature, is almost always metaphorical and does, reflect our society and its issues and try to predict some of the possibilities. I mean, we're not trying to predict something accurate very often. We're trying to take a situation to its extreme to say, this is what could happen. Let's think about this before it gets anywhere near that point. And I know you had Robert J. Sawyer as a guest just a little while ago. He's one of my favorite science fiction writer, a friend and kind of a mentor. And I believe his views and mine mesh in that area too. Metaphorical, thoughtful science fiction. That doesn't mean it's not entertaining. It's all about, being entertaining while you're making people think.
Now, as again, we talked a little bit about your first book, Dead Air, which I believe was not science fiction, right?
Right. Yeah, no, just a straight mystery thriller, I call it.
So what was it like for you to kind of, I mean, that was your first novel, but even then, after that, you kind of switched genres. What was that leap to science fiction like?
Well, I had always wanted to be a science fiction writer. I just knew that there was a story to tell in Dead Air that I wanted to tell first, and it made sense as my debut novel. But I had been writing science fiction short stories and getting them published in various magazines and anthologies across North America to kind of build up some credibility with the readership, and then tackled a full-length novel with one called The Primus Labyrinth. I don't know if you remember The Fantastic Voyage, the movie with Raquel Welch and everybody back in the 60s. They shrink down a submarine and it travels through the bloodstream. And I thought, shrink rays are not physically possible, probably never will be. What could really happen? Well, they're building nanotechnology to do exactly that, to travel through the bloodstream, to deliver drugs and medicines, or for whatever kind of scanning purposes, diagnostic purposes. So I created this idea of a submersible, virus-sized, traveling through the bloodstream, controlled by virtual reality. But the pilot they recruit has a PTSD situation to start with, and his mind links so closely with that submersible that he has a hard time distinguishing reality. And there are a lot of ethical issues involved in the story, too.
I often ask authors if they would like to see their book, and in this case, Indigent Earth, turned into either a film or a miniseries. I'm sure you're in that camp of, gee, I'd like that to happen.
Well, absolutely. I mean, for one thing, that's where the money is. And for another, it does draw readers. And it's all about getting the readers. But many, many readers have told me, oh, I could picture this. I could picture this as a film. And absolutely, I try to write that way so that it's vivid in your mind. And I think it would make a great story. Indigent Earth is an adventure story. It does go out to one of the space colonies. It also spends most of its time in what is now the Northern Ontario bush, which is much where I live, and a kind of a survival chase scenario. So along with these strong characters and strong issues, I think it could make a very good, probably miniseries, although it might fit into a movie.
When you wrote this book, did you know every aspect of it before you started, or do you kind of write and the story develops itself?
Well, I'm not a seat-of-the-pants writer, as they say. No, I am an outliner and planner because I generally, well, always start with a concept and a theme that I want to explore. And so I build from there. I figure out what characters would best embody that and bring that theme to life. And then I work from there with a lot of planning. That's not to say that it can't take its own direction at times. I have many, many of those kind of eureka moments when I'm writing a story where I'll go, oh yeah, of course, this character would do that. They would go in that direction. And the story needs to go in this direction, or the setting demands something. So there are a lot of changes that come along the way, but I do plan it out. I try to have a strong ending that I'm going for, But that can change. And I think, as I recall it, Indigent Earth did have some pretty strong changes as I went.
And for people who actually know you and they read your book, do they see you portrayed in any of the characters when they read your writings?
I think there's always some of us in our writing because the reader has to be able to identify with the characters, or you've got nothing. If they don't identify and care about the characters, it doesn't matter what a great plot you've got or anything else, they won't buy into it. They'll get no real emotional payoff from it. So where do we go to get that? We get that from ourselves and people we know. But none of the stories have characters that are really me, not even Dead Air, and maybe especially not that one because he's a pretty troubled guy. And Indigent Earth is quite a different character in Killian Morningcloud, the main male protagonist. There are just bits of the human nature, I guess, that are here and there. We know from ourselves how we might feel in a situation, and we draw on that.
Well, it's an amazing concept. The book is called Indigent Earth, and I thank you very much, Scott, for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Well, it was a great interview and a terrific pleasure. Nice meeting you, Peter.
Scott Overton, author of Indigent Earth. You can go to my website at thestufffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0751, and you'll find links to Scott's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly.
You've just heard an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder. To hear any or all of the full hour-long shows, visit thestufffile.com. Stuph is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's thestufffile.com. A presentation of Flying Fish Communications.